Thank you. Okay, so here we're going to talk all about leading organisational change. We thought it was a good time of year to do change, you know, getting to the point where sadly the seasons are going to change, although we've had at least a decent summer, most of us. It's also topical for us, a little plug. Some of you who know me will know that I've written a book on change, well, 2 books on change, and we're actually, this little mini one, which is a subset of Change Superhero, which is my original one, has been shortlisted in the British Book Awards. So we're going to Wembley, if we can get in without the trains, tomorrow for a little party. I'm not holding out much hope, but it's always nice to go and have a little celebration and to be shortlisted. So I thought it was topical to talk about at this point in time. Those of you who know me, which I know some of you I actually used to work with, I was in learning and development, in corporate learning and development roles. I'm a chartered psychologist, and my day job is running Actus software. It's actually interesting, it's slightly out of date. We said performance learning and talent software. We've really shifted a bit into the compliance space recently as well. So yeah, we've broadened out. We've got quite a breadth that our software uses. I host the HR Uprising podcast still, and we're into our 6th year of this. And also, I'll say, I've talked about my change book. And when I'm not sitting at my desk glued to a screen, I do try to get out and play netball and tennis. So let's crack on into what this is all about. I've mentioned the software. It goes without saying, if you're interested in any of that, do feel free to reach out. We've got lots of information on it. But in terms of managing change, if you were rolling out some software, of any kind of software, what you're normally having to do is manage organizational change. If you think about rolling out software, one of the issues very often is people issues. Even though you can roll out a system project, and I've been involved in them in my past, where the systems have been rolled out brilliantly, but no one uses them. And that's really what we're going to focus on here, is the actual people change piece in terms of something. It's not just about the systems. So what we're going to cover in terms of the topics or the outcomes, we'll talk about what it is that potentially can make change fail. I'm going to refer to Kotter's 8-step change process and try to demonstrate where that might kind of fall apart if you're leading a change. And I can see some of you are leading change processes, so you'll watch out if you want to use it. I'll touch on personalities and change and a tool called format. That is actually quite a meaty agenda. So we are recording it. I'll go at a reasonable pace, but if you've got questions, if I'm not making things clear, do let me know. And also we'll send you a link. I think it's not come out yet. Oh, yeah, in fact, it's already there. It's on the book. But we've also got a link to a toolkit, which is lots and lots of resources that you can use if you're managing change. So these things might whet your appetite. And if you want to know more about them, well, actually, you can obviously ask AI, ask all those sort of things, read my book, listen to the podcast. I've done episodes on it as well, but the resources are there if you want to put it into place practically for yourselves. So now for you to use the chat. What do you think? What causes change to fail in your opinion? And I know certainly I've already alluded to one very human aspect of it, but what else do you think may mean that a change project isn't as successful as it could be? Absolutely right, Gemma. Bad communication or lack of communication. Kotter, John Kotter, who the model is, he says that you need to communicate change 10 times more than you think you should. And I think that's quite interesting, because often we think we've told people about something, but they haven't actually heard it. And all of these things you're talking about here, absolutely, are other things to do with communication. It very much is about that. So Erin's saying if you haven't consulted or engaged with the end user, that's a really valid point that, Erin, I'm going to pick out that particular one when we go into the Kotter model. People don't understand the reasons or the benefit change, so they don't know why. And that's where I'm not going to talk about it in this webinar, but you'll have come across the change curve where you say people are in denial. And often one of the things that you need to do to get people out of denial is to help people understand what's in it for them, what's the why, what's the rationale for change. If people don't understand the why, that follows on, Deb, doesn't it, totally, that you don't get the buy-in, leads and stuff, so they pay lip service to it or they carry on doing what they're doing. Absolutely, the why. Insufficient planning for eventualities, Charlie. That's great. And that, again, that's similar to if you're not engaging the end users. Sometimes these big projects are rolled out and no one's actually thought about the end users, or they say they switch switch an expenses system or something like that, and they've missed a micro detail that hasn't been come about it, that makes everything become unstuck. Comms, rationale, lack of training, absolutely. Consistency is a good one as well, actually, there, Charlotte, in the fact that sometimes people think they go, oh, here's a change, do it, and then they don't embed it. So it's not consistently rolled out, or some people, sponsors, key people, are not modeling the change behaviours, or they're resisting it. So all those sort of things can really make a difference if your sponsors and the key people within the business, the influencers, are not helping. So all of those, I think, are really, really valid points. And a Peter Senge quote here is that people don't resist change, they resist being changed. So if people think something's being done to them, i.e. they don't understand the why, we haven't taken the time to get their buy-in, then you are much more likely to get resistance and pushback. And that's when, if we're change agents, it can feel really exhausting because people are maybe resisting it. But actually, for me, resistance is a key part of the change curve. At least when people are resisting, and by that maybe saying, oh, this will never work, or why do we have to do this? At least they're talking to you. They're not annoying it. And if we can solve that with communication by helping them look to the future, understand the rationale, then you can get them through to commitment. So certainly the things that make change fail, all of those were people aspects, weren't they, in terms of communication. Quite often you can see something's not been thought through properly. We didn't mention this one, and I think this is relevant. I sometimes work with really large organisations, particularly public sector, and there's no sense of urgency, and people can just go off the boil. You do need to have, even if it's sort of milestones, so we've got to achieve this point by then. So you have a project plan with deadlines that creates a bit of momentum or impetus. Because if it's all just got to be done, well, someday never comes. So you need to have that little bit of drive to give it. So not too short timescale, but not too long either. People not having the clear expectations or vision, you guys talked about that. Also leadership and sponsorship, lack of buy-in, so people don't know the why, and loss of impetus or follow through. So chucking in a few models here. So the Lewin change model, he talks about if you're making a change in an organisation, you've got to first of all unfreeze the status quo. So I kind of think about this as if you wanted to change, I don't know why this comes to, I know it's not Christmas, but I say you've got a snowman ice cube, and you want to change it into a Father Christmas ice cube. Getting a bit ahead of myself, aren't I, as we're getting into autumn. Then what you would want to do, you can't obviously just put it from one mold into the other, stating the obvious. You've got to unfreeze it into water to refreeze it in the new set. And this is where your whole element of change is thinking about where are people currently, how do you get them ready for change? And a lot of this is the why, it's the vision. And then how do you then get them set in the new way? And some of you talked about the fact that maybe it's not followed through or it's not consistent. So that's when you refreeze. So loads of organisations just kind of do change. So they don't bother kind of understanding where people are. They just kind of go in and say, this is the change, get on with it. As opposed to meeting people where they are, helping people understand the rationale, and then pulling them through. And then once they've started to change, getting that momentum, building on it, and refreezing in the new way. So if you bear in mind that unfreeze, change, refreeze, I'm going to overlay that onto Kotter's 8-step model. Just are many of you familiar with Kotter's 8-step model? I'm sure lots of you will have heard of it. I'm sure you probably have, but I was putting it up here for you. So what we'll do here is I'm going to talk about how you can go through this model, and then I'll ask you, where do you think change, particularly large scale change? So this model is more for larger scale change. So if you were rolling out a system or a project in an organisation, and then I'll be interested to see whether, if you've got experience of this, and if you can think of a change that you've been involved in that maybe was successful or not successful, where did it fall down? With one or more places. So this bit at the start is the unfreeze element, and let's say we've got this large scale change. What we need to do is we realise we've got to create a sense of urgency to get people to want to change Now, the not particularly nice analogy is the burning bridge analogy, burning platform analogy. But if we think about it in the business context, you might identify a potential crisis or a major opportunity, more positively, that you need to take advantage of. The next step, Kotter says, is you need to have a powerful guiding coalition. And this is a group of people large enough to lead change. Oops.
Yeah.
Hang on a minute. It's on. Oh, it is mute. But a group of people large enough to lead the change. And then what happens is you need to start to create that vision. So what you're really doing is identifying the tools to help people see why they need to unfreeze the way it is currently. Now, in larger organizations, those of you who've been involved in it, quite often the people who know this, and often it has to be, especially if you think about things like restructures, the people who are in the know have to be kept quite tight. And what that can mean is that when you then go and start communicating the change, which is the orange bit, is that this is totally news to other people. So the people who are involved, the powerful guiding coalition, they've had chance to get used to it, to overcome their own resistance. They've worked on the messages. So they are further down the line in terms of acceptance and commitment than the people who are hearing it for the first time. But sometimes they forget that they are there. And that's where we have to be quite careful about where the change starts to happen, where we just hit the orange bit here. The marathon effect, Rachel. So do you mean by that the fact you've got to keep going, you've got to keep jogging? Tell us a little bit more on the marathon effect. Or you can unmute. Are you going to unmute? Looking for the mute button. I'll do just speak up. Well, if you manage to do it, I'll put the type.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah. What's the marathon effect, Rachel?
The marathon effect is a recognised principle where the idea is about the elite marathon runners at the front of the queue run ahead and leave the sort of people behind. So it's that idea as leaders of change, you forget that, like exactly what you said, that people don't know what's happening, and it's that need to over communicate. It's a well documented effect. Exactly what you're talking about. It's just the technical term for it.
So. And they're oblivious to the fact that just because they can run a marathon in 2 hours, and also the fact that they haven't got loads of other people to get past. They're in pole position. So so it's about taking others with us, right, and being aware that other people are having a different journey in terms of that, and we have to be alert to that if we're in that change leader piece. The other one I want to just pick up here, so I've come up when we've looked at case studies. One of you mentioned where you haven't looked at the end users. I've definitely done examples where we've done worked examples of this where it's the people on the ground, actually the change hasn't been properly thought through. It's been done so high level that yes, we're going to restructure or we're going to roll out this great system or whatever it is, but the people who were in the powerful guiding coalition didn't have enough data or insight into the realities of the current status quo, and so they can sometimes become unstuck, which can be a bit of a problem if that happens. So it is for me, and I'll mention it after, just making sure you've got the right people there, and that it's not just idealistic vision. There's also a bit about the realities and having some project managers and things in place. So we've got to the point here where we've unfrozen and now we're moving into doing the change. And this is where you might start to build more of a change coalition, more people. In terms of the book that I talk about, having, change champions, the people who are going to get involved. The more people that talk about it and own the change, the better. So you want to use every method to communicate that new direction. So it's, verbal, written, getting people in small groups, getting people in large groups, trying to make sure that it's disseminated as much as possible. Now, of course, that isn't change. Lots of people just go, they just do that. And that's where change starts and stops, just 0.4. And that's why it's often not successful. But you then need to keep on going. So the points that were made in the chat about consistency, that's about us making sure that we're removing obstacles, we're empowering people, basically ensuring that the vision is not undermined. And these are the things that ideally you might have spotted those up front as things that needed to be addressed, but you make sure that you're changing those as you go, so you keep that sense of momentum. And then now what we're going to, for me, is starting to push back uphill. So again, you've taken away obstacles, but you've still got to get to the point where you've got some short-term wins. Short-term wins are really useful for helping those people, let's stick with Rachel's marathon analogy, those people bringing up the back of the marathon, thinking about giving up, hearing that there's, it's downhill over here, or we've had some success, here. So people keeping the faith, they're seeing that there's something beneficial about it. So you want to make sure that people see that it's happening. That's also useful because if you have got those groups of people who are in denial and sort of digging their heels in and doing nothing and waiting until it goes away, then it helps those people realize that it's real, that they need to change. So then by the end of the orange bit, you've done the bulk of the change. But this is where, again, it's really easy to stop. Keep on consolidating. So keep on pushing through. If it's just, this all depends on the size of the change. If everyone's moved over to a new way of working, brilliant. But if it is something like we're rolling out a performance management system, you might then roll a different piece of functionality out, or you might focus on one-to-ones or focus on recognition, whatever it might be that keeps that change alive and turns it into business as usual. So that's what you're really trying to do, to consolidate it, to make something absolutely embedded so that it's there. So that's me taking you through it. What I'm going to do now is pop up a poll. And if you've experience of a specific change, I'm going to ask you to say, where do you think a change that you saw or were involved in broke down? Where did it fail in your experience? Okay, brilliant. Up to 60% participation. Okay, I'll do a good countdown if anyone wants to. 70%, brilliant. Oh, wow. Okay, I'm going to count down and I'll share it. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Brilliant. Okay, 86% taken part. Share the results. So you can see there's definitely a mix here, but here is where a lot of people are saying it's broken down. And this is where I generally, when I've done this in practical workshops, is really common. So it's this disconnect between the people who are in the know and then coming out and starting to communicate it and then not involving people enough. Sometimes it's done too much as a tell. This is what we'll do. What you want to make it involving. You need to get other people. You almost need to think about that ripple effect, involving other people in it. So often it falls down there. Maybe the messaging's wrong. Maybe not enough empathy is in. And actually, I'll talk about communication in a minute, as in it's just too much of a one-way communication without that two-way to enable buy-in. And there's many ways there, or as Kotter says, we just don't do it enough. We go and do it, and it's not communicated well enough. Remember, communication is about how you manage, how your message is understood. It's not just the words we say. So we might have said the words, but it doesn't mean that it's landed. All of those others are legitimate. That's why it's a great model. But I think that's a really common one. And me personally, I've also seen the whole bit here, and I'm interested that few of you have seen that in terms of the creating short-term wins or consolidation. But I would actually keep an eye out for it, because what I've seen in large companies with big projects, quite often people lose energy towards this this bit here, and probably what you want, and my recommendation, is a bit of a refresh of the change team if it's a big lengthy project, because you can lose the will to live. If you are somebody who is a natural starter, a natural change agent tends to be really good at starting and good at communicating, not always brilliant at finishing. So think about that in terms of who you have in your team for the stage in the process. So, and then what I wanted to do here is just to give some practical suggestions as to, if you are involved in leading change, the people aspects, as most of you on this call are the people aspects of change, what you can practically do to make sure it's successful, and just to those watch outs as you're that change agent. So, and remember, as change agents, we are not necessarily the most senior people in the room. We are people who we don't have the positional power, but we need to have influence. We need to get people to listen to us. So at the start, that sense of urgency, make sure the message is clear so people are going to get that why. Why came through so strongly, didn't it, in the chat? So is there a clear why that's going to land with your audience? And you can ask those questions. If you are a trainer or coach, you can say, so do we have a really clear why? And is that why relevant? The fact that the fact that shareholder returns are not high enough doesn't really float the boat of people on the manufacturing floor, for example. So you need to have a range of whys that are going to resonate with the different audiences that you have in an organisation. Then talking about the powerful guiding coalition, I think I've touched on this as well, but do think about who's involved. Make sure it's not just too high level. Also, think about stakeholders, other people who are involved who might be resistors. Is it a good idea to get them in early, or certainly to engage their views, so you can actually get those sort of negative viewpoints or the obstacles, get sight of those before you start down your journey. So get people to think about make sure the group's right. And those of you who've worked in large organisations, in my view, there's always a list of usual suspects that are top of the list to be in any sort of programme, and they may not be the best people to do it. That some of them might be, but not all of them. So make sure it's there. Definitely, Omar, I totally agree with that. Winning those immediate immediate wins that people then get to buy into it, don't they? The similar message to the why for me. The vision, it needs to be relevant to all staff. So it needs to be something that works for all levels of stakeholders. Then in terms of the communication, can have you got, having said you don't want everyone to be too senior, have you got a senior convincing stakeholder or sponsor, particularly someone who's got that charisma or that energy and that people buy into, who's a good communicator? 90% of the points we made in the chat were about communication. So do you have that person who has that messaging? Then how do we keep momentum? So this is where actually having a great project manager or somebody who is really structured, not just enthusiastic about change, but someone who's good at dotting the I's, crossing the T's, pushing things through to keep that momentum and keep people focused. As Omar said, we want those wins, we want shouts, so make sure those are communicated. They go out in sort of staff bulletins and they're really visible that those wins are there, and recognise there's recognition available to those people who are the leaders. And then for me, the refreeze, again, I'm alluding to a large scale project. Say a large scale project, and I'll go with an HR one, a company that we worked with really well that did this really, really perfectly actually. Once you get to this point, something's rolled out, you've broken the back of it, it's 80% there. What you probably want to do is refresh the change team and start to introduce the people in who are going to be working with that system business as usual. So sometimes it's a different project manager, sometimes there's someone who's more administrative, but the point is you want to keep the energy going. And those early people, if it's a project that's been going on 9 months, those early people might have lost enthusiasm. So bring people in who are good at bedding stuff in. And that's when I say think about implementers and completer finishers, in Belbin language to bring those in. And then getting it anchored is, we're talking about change here that presumably was done for business benefit. You want to measure the outputs of those change and ideally have it visible at board level. So for something like performance management, I'd make sure that monthly the board members were seeing how their department or division was doing in terms of usage, so they can actually compare how well it's being embedded. And the great thing about that is you're getting accountability at the top of usage of something. So most systems, you're spending loads of money to roll something out. Is it actually being utilized in the way that was expected? And are those people who are responsible at the top of the business aware of that utilization of whatever that system is? Because if it's not being used, you're not going to get the benefit, basically. So that's my sort of synopsis of Kotter. And I said this is quite meaty. I've now got a few other points just to share with you, but I'll go through them relatively rapidly because there's lots of slides. I'm sure lots of you are going to have to disappear places. Other things to think about. You've probably come across force field analysis. These are things that you can do when you're planning your change. And you can think about this, in force fields can be people. So I nearly put stakeholders in. You can do stakeholder analysis too. Think about who are those people you want on your side, what's working for you in terms of this change, but what's going to hold you back. and doing a bit of planning about removing some of the restraining forces or involving them if they're people, getting them on side, can save quite a lot of pain as you're going through it. The other thing in terms of communication, lots of this is about communication, and in the we've got detailed notes about these in the toolkit. Very high level, most of you would have come across Myers-Briggs. I know not everybody loves it, but I think this works for me in terms of thinking about differences. It really doesn't matter what someone's Myers-Briggs profile is, but what I suppose the point I want you to take away from this is when you are communicating, so we might be the people who are writing the communication that other people deliver, or we might deliver it. Think about the different reactions to change, because that needs to be accommodated in terms of this. So if you think about the introverts versus extroverts, if you're announcing a change, the extroverts, they want to talk about it. They want to talk it through now. They'll discuss with others and they'll enjoy interacting as a group about it. So they'll be chit-chatting away. Whereas the introverts, they might want time to reflect and process it. They'll have questions later. So you've got to be able to be aware that maybe they want information up front, or maybe you need to give people, it's all very well communicating something and staying there for an hour if they've got questions, but they might have questions a couple of days later. So thinking about how people need that extra information. And building on that, you've got people who have preferences around how they take in information. So people with sensing preferences in Myers-Briggs, they want the facts and details. They want practical, straightforward language, real examples. So don't start to communicate a change if you haven't got an answer to at least some of the details, because they will ask you the detailed questions. And they're not going to go so much with the flow. The intuitives, on the other hand, they're perfectly happy with the vision, right? So they can potentially go off with the vision, potentially over-egg the vision, and they like metaphors and analogies. But again, so you need to be able to inspire the vision, but have sufficient detail, or if not all of the details being worked out and you still have to communicate the change, you need to say when extra detail will be worked out. You need to be we'll know exactly what the size of the organisation will be, or when the timings, we'll know that by X date. We'll give you additional information on Y date. So you need to be prepared to give certainty in so much as you can to those with a sensing preference. Thinking and feeling versus feelings. Thinking things interesting. So you could be announcing a mass redundancy, and people with thinking preference, if they can see the logic, will quite often, it's surprising how accepting they can be of it in terms of this. As long as they can be quite objective, non-emotional about it and move on quite quickly, as long as it's well communicated and your rationale is well communicated. Those with a feeling preference, they're the ones, even if let's say it's redundancy and they know they're safe, they're going to worry about other people. So they really do appreciate personal information, personal comms, and sensitivity in that. So you have to be able to balance both types. And again, being aware to these, and this is where different types of communication, you might communicate something en masse, something else one-to-one. Just bear in mind these different preferences as you're communicating change. and again, judging and perceiving. J, so if you had an STJ, they might want specific information, fairly non-emotional about it, and they want that structured timelines. They also probably want closure quite quickly, so definitive decisions and things like that. Perceivers, they're much more flexible in terms of change. So if you think a bit about this, it's not necessarily negative. Remember, change isn't always negative. I'd say someone with an NP preference in Myers-Briggs is probably someone who's quite good at being your change agent, because they get quite excited about change. If they're good communicators, they're good communicators about it. They're flexible. They go, oh well, we can work this out. They quite like that flexibility of change, whereas others with different preferences may find it much more uncomfortable. So it's being aware that people react to change differently. It is individual, it is personal, but when you're communicating it, you need to have be mindful of those differences. And if you are mindful of those differences, you're going to take more people with you more of the time, and that's what it's all about. And then just closing down, one other tool here, and again, all this, there's more details on all of this. If you're writing change communication, or defining a PowerPoint slide or something like that, this model can be quite useful. And I want to say it's Bernice Flack, but I might have got the name wrong. It's format. She calls it format comms, but it's basically thinking about that thing. First of all, start with the why. If you're communicating, because our parent company has decided to take on another business, we're going to be merging, right? Or whatever it might be. So what's the why? What's the rationale? Because XYZ business has gone out of business, or because interest rates have gone up, whatever it might be. What's the why as to why we need to make a change? Help people understand that there's a why. Then they want to know what. So what does this actually entail? And this is not really lengthy. It's just having a show. So this means that company X and company Y will be becoming one entity. How and when? Well, realistically, nothing's going to happen for 18 months, or it's going to happen in 6 months, whatever it's going to be, but practical next steps and timing. So you go, why, what? Do the why first, because people need to have that why before they start thinking about the other things. But you need to have enough of the practical stuff for those individuals who have gone uncertain by change. And then this is the bit that's maybe different, because why, what, how is fairly common sense. What she suggests here is that you say, what if, and what you need to kind of communicate, not in as clunky a way as it sounds when I'm doing it, but you need to explain to what happens if we do this. So this is what the positive outcome will. We're going to be one aligned business. We're going to be much more streamlined. We're going to be more competitive in the marketplace. What happens if we don't do this? We're likely going to be uncompetitive, blah, 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 blah. So it's kind of, I see it a little bit as carrot and stick motivation. You're trying to just help people. You've told them why, what, how, but you're kind of reinforcing that why by saying that if we do this, this is a positive future. If we don't do this, this is a negative future. So it's a subtlety to be able to do that well, but it helps people really get the need for the change, putting that what if, what if we do, what if we don't at the end. So I feel I've covered quite a lot of content there, and so I'm going to stop there. If there are any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. As we say, there's loads of resources for you to refer back to if helpful, and I've done lots of other training. If any of you are actually in companies that want to do training, I do a 3-module course, How to Be a Change Superhero program, which I've done a few places, which is quite nice, where you can go into all of this in more detail. And that works really well, say, for HR groups or groups of people who are trying to do this. So just putting up here links and resources. It's coming out to you anyway. You want more information on this. We've got key resources which are visible here. There's key resources being dropped in the chat by my colleague Laura. I've done lots of podcast episodes on that. You'll be able to go and search change ones in HR Uprising. And then if you want to join me for any of our other webinars, the next 2 coming up in autumn, I'm going to talk about 360 feedback. So if you ever want to do 360 feedback and you want to know how to do it, so the do's and don'ts, how to design it, what not to do, what to do in terms of 360 feedback, that's in October. And also appraisals, how you can restructure them, how you can just make them more effective is what we're focusing on in November. And then we've also got a partner webinar to do with compliance and consumer duty if anyone happens to be in financial services. So I'll stop there. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. Please do feel free to comment, question, ask anything you wish to, or if you're done and dusted, I hope you found this valuable. Thank you for staying with me, and I hope to see you on a future webinar.